Welcome to today's webinar, Using Theater as a Tool for Community Change. My name is Megan Wanless, and I'm a Senior Community Animator with the Tamarack Institute. And it is my pleasure to introduce the discussion today and to our webinar guest, David Diamond. David was a founding member and artistic director of Vancouver's Headlines Theatre, which evolved into Theatre for Living from 1981 to 2018, when he devolved the theatre company and started to work independently. David has directed approximately 600 projects all around the world on issues of violence, addiction, mental health, the legacy of residential schools, reconciliation, homelessness, and climate change, just to name a few. He has pioneered the development of live interactive forum television and webcasting. David is visiting faculty at the UNESCO Peace Studies program in Austria and also visiting theater director at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Alberta. He has many theater and human rights awards, including an honorary doctorate from the University of the Fraser Valley. Welcome, David. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today. So before we get started, we wanted to get an idea of who's in the room. So we took a look at who's registered for the webinar today, and we have a diverse group of people from all different sectors and actually across the globe. This is one of our most diverse groups that we've had on a webinar call, so we want to welcome you. As part of this welcome, we also want to get an idea of who has experience using applied theater in their community work and who is absolutely new to this idea. So Duncan, my colleague from Tamarack, is going to launch a poll to find out a little bit more about your experience using theater for community change. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen here, and it will say, what is your experience using theater for community change? 1, none, this is brand new to me. 2, I've heard of it but don't know much about it. 3, I've experienced it before. And 4, tons, I live for this. So feel free to put in your response there and we'll just tally them up. Okay, Duncan, feel free to close the poll. Okay, so we've actually got a pretty good split. We've got about 19% saying none, this is brand new to me. 24% saying I've heard of it but don't know much about it. 39% say I've experienced it before, and 19% say tons, I live for this. So that's really interesting. We've got a really good mix of people in the crowd today, so that's going to make for some good conversation. And on that note, at the end of the call, we will have a question and answer period. So as things are popping up for you throughout the call, feel free to write them in your question box and we will get to them at the end of the call. Okay, so to start us off, David, for the people who talked about in the poll being completely new to this idea, when they think of theater, they might think of going to see a public performance in a nice fancy theater space. So how is applied theater work and the work of Theater for Living different than this traditional idea of theater?
Well, sometimes my shows do perform in a very nice theater space, but they also perform in community venues. Applied theater tends to be theater somehow about social issues. That's something that I think that all applied theater has in common. And it tends to, although in my work, I'm sometimes mixing professional actors with people from the community, there's also times when it's only people from the community. And so it's the kind of theater where you're not relying on professional actors to pretend that they know something about something. You're really working in community and honoring the expertise of people who live inside the community. And sometimes it goes to performance and sometimes they're closed workshops. I think that storytelling used to belong to everybody. We know as individuals, if we don't express ourselves, we get sick, right? If we just keep it all bottled up inside us, eventually we're going to get sick. Well, in the same way that our bodies are made up of cells and make up the living organism of our bodies, communities are made up of people that make up the living organism of the living community. The way communities used to express themselves was through artistic practice, song, dance, drama, language that Auguste Boal, the founder of the Theatre of the Oppressed, used to say, belongs to all of humanity, not just those people who get to stand in the light. But recently, in the evolution of humankind, that language has gotten commodified along with everything else. And so now we buy music, we buy dance, we buy drama. We pay strangers to tell us stories about strangers. When do we get together as living communities, not to tell one person's story or another person's story, but our collective stories? The answer is we don't, to a very large degree. And in the same way that people get sick when they can't express themselves, so do communities. I think the proof of that is everywhere we look. And so applied theater, I think, regardless of what the subject matter is always a community health process. Even when that community is like an organization, because an organization in its own way is also a living community. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's really helpful. And I think what you're saying too is with applied theater, it's something that belongs to all of us. It's something that, you know, there's not this divide between a professional actor and regular citizens, but it's about creating work with citizens as actors, right?
Yes, and you know, even when I work with professional actors, they've got to be living the issues that we're dealing with in the project. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they have no place in the process.
Right. And so, I mean, you've spoken a little bit to this already, but then in your experience, how can theater done in this way, using applied theater, create social change? How can it create change in our communities?
Well, you know, I don't know how many people here are familiar with the work of Paulo Freire. He's most famous for the pedagogy of the oppressed. He wrote many, many books after that. I encourage people to look at his other work as well. One of the things that he writes about eloquently, what a bad word to say badly, is that sometimes communities mount revolutions. Keep in mind, revolutions don't have to be guerrillas in the mountains with guns. They can happen in many, many ways. And sometimes they win those revolutions. They actually create the change they wanted to create. Very often to become the very problem they were fighting against. We see that happen throughout history. Why does that happen? Well, I think that nature gives us one of the reasons that happens. And that is that we trick ourselves into believing that we're prisoners of the oppressive structures that we inhabit. And so we work to change the structures. Well, those structures, folks, didn't come from outer space. Human beings grew and sustained those structures. Now, having said that, there are times when things do kind of come from outer space. Colonialism is a good example of that. You know, not everything is always true every time, but the colonial structures were also built by people. Nature, though, teaches us that it is patterns of behavior that create structure, not the other way around. I think that structural change is really, really important, but the theater actually isn't a good vehicle for structural change. The theater is its most powerful when it deals with human behavior. It's what theater is all about, human relationships. So I know a lot of people doing really good work on structural change. But if that's all we do, if we neglect the patterns of behavior that create and sustain the oppressive structures, we're doomed to recreate the same oppressive structures all over again. So, you know, in a healthy activist ecology, there's space for lots of different ways of working. Just like in, you know, if wheat is going to be healthy, there need to be lots of different strains of wheat. Same. And so the way theater creates change is by really investigating the human behaviors and working to change those human behaviors that create and sustain the structures that make our societies unhealthy. And I mean this inside the individual, inside our friends and family, and inside the larger structures, because they're all interconnected.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is really relevant for people working in systemic change or just very grassroots level change, because I think what people are becoming more cognizant of is that human element's often left out, right? Like we're trying to rush towards a solution, but we haven't built that foundation first of how do we have trusting, open conversation, and how do we really get each individual's perspective, to the forefront to actually even start addressing an issue. So I think what you've talked about is really resonant.
Here in Canada, one of the things that's happening in Canada is a lot of talk about reconciliation with Indigenous nations and communities. And I think that's vitally important to the health of the country. And there's structural stuff that needs to happen, and there's some legislation that needs to happen. But reconciliation will never be real unless the country goes through a profound cultural change at a grassroots, personal level. Individual Canadians need to learn the truth of Canadian history, need to alter the lens through which they view Indigenous people in the country, or reconciliation won't be real. And that, I want to say, isn't the job of Indigenous nations and Indigenous people. It's the job of the rest of us.
So let's talk a little bit about your process then in terms of working in this type of way. So at Theatre for Living, some of your work ends in performance, not all of it. So can you tell us about a workshop where performance wasn't the outcome? So what kind of value can participants get from an applied theatre experience based on sort of the exercises that you might run in a workshop?
Well, interestingly, that's why this slide just came up.
How convenient.
So how convenient. So, I think I've already said that whatever the project is, whatever the subject matter is, in some way, it's always a community health issue. And I think that we're living in a very mechanizing world. And so in some way, for me, what this work does is always work against the mechanization and towards the rehumanization of individuals, families, larger organizations. I was invited to be the visiting theater director in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry at the University of Alberta. And the reason for that was a desire to transform the culture of the learning environment across the faculty. And so that meant doing workshops, often using image theater. That's what this slide is. This is an image created by people living inside the faculty about an aspect of mechanization inside the culture of the learning environment. One of the things that rose up inside that work, and I think this isn't just the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, this exists everywhere, is a culture of silence. Especially inside really hierarchical institutions, where if you rock the boat, you are a problem. And your potential for advancement, your potential to be a valued member inside the community goes into jeopardy. And so this image got created by people who were living this. And inside the activation of that image, of course, there's an audience here watching this. It's not just these 4 people in the workshop. I'm asking people to come and go from inside this image. For instance, if you've been one of these characters, come and stand in the same shape as the character. And so some people are coming and doing silencing. Some people are coming and being silenced. Some people are, they're taking the different shapes inside this image. And from inside that, and so first of all, you're seeing how many different people inside this image, which we're not defining. I'm not interested in the image work in serving the person who made the image. I'm not asking that person to explain it ever at all. I'm interested in the group's perceptions of the image. I want to work with the larger psyche inside the room. And so we're not explaining the image at all. And so people are coming in, they're taking on the different shapes, and they're owning, in a way, their own roles inside the issue. Lots of people are coming and putting their hands on people's mouths, for instance. And I'm getting them to say sentences. And in the process of that, you're starting to have a weird kind of dialogue about not just the fact that it's happening, but why it's happening. I got really tired of dealing with symptoms. Yes, we know violence is an issue. Yes, we know that, folks. The question we should be asking isn't how do we, of course we should be asking how do we stop the violence? How do we stop the violent person? But underneath that, I think the essential question is, why are we growing so much violence? And how do we stop growing the violence? Why is a culture like a faculty of medicine and dentistry growing so much silence? And how do we open up the space inside the faculty for people to be able to actually speak their minds and not get punished somehow for it? And the theater work, I know this because the feedback has been so wonderful, has been really helping to do that. Now you take that concept and translate that into any other kind of situation, whether it's in an organization or in a community, just in a community, and into any issue. The process works the same way.
That's amazing. And so when you're working with a group like this, I mean, you're talking a little bit about image theater here, creating an image and then actually bringing that image to life.
Yeah, and to be clear, that's just one tool inside a larger vocabulary.
Yeah, so I was going to kind of jump in with another question. So as you're getting to the point of, getting to the point where people are open enough with each other, where they're able to build these images and able to provide sentences, what's an example of an exercise that you use in your workshops to kind of get people into that comfort level before jumping into an image? Like, do you have one that you like to use and why?
Well, I actually start every workshop I do with the same exercise. So I'll talk about that because it's fundamental for me. And sometimes, very sadly, people find doing this really challenging. Is I say, take a partner, somebody you're going to feel comfortable pushing against, because, they've never met. Well, sometimes these are people who know each other, but often they're strangers. And I say, find someone you're going to feel comfortable pushing against, and please start by putting your hands on each other's shoulders, something that would be very challenging right now in the pandemic. And I'm going to ask you to push, really push. Not to, now, and I explain stuff. This is not a contest to try to push each other over. One of you is going to be stronger than the other. That's life. The person who's stronger, push less hard. The person who isn't as strong, push harder. I'm asking you to find a balance of strength between each other. Have a dialogue with your bodies to find the balance of strength. Don't be too polite. Challenge each other. And then they're going to push with different parts of their bodies. And interestingly, sometimes in the faculty of medicine with medical professionals, they've said, you want us to touch each other, right? And that's symptomatic, and I don't think it's just the faculty of medicine, of how far we've come from being human beings together. It's awful. But I do this because it does a number of things. It breaks down some barriers in the room. People might be reluctant to do this, but then once they start doing it, they're laughing and all kinds of barriers are breaking down. Because, there's good touch and there's not good touch. And human beings are tactile animals, And if we're going to make theater together, we have to be able to work together intimately in good ways. But there's another reason to do it, and that is that the very nature of the theatrical moment is this character wants something, and this character wants something else. And those two things are in opposition to each other. This is what creates drama. You don't see movies, plays, TV shows about people just getting along. There is always dramatic tension. And so it's a way for me to explain to people that if we're going to do valuable work, we have to be willing to engage in this process of pushing against each other and dramatic tension. Because, Chief Dr. Robert Joseph, who became the face of Reconciliation Canada, he said this about reconciliation. But, he also said this applies to any kind of reconciliation, anywhere, in any community. Reconciliation is impossible unless we're prepared to start from the broken, from the wounded place. And so inside this work, we're often looking at the problem, at the struggles that people are having, to find a collective space of the problem that we can work in so that we can then try to start solving that problem. But Freire also talked about this in the Pedagogy of Hope, which really inspired me to invent other exercises. We cannot get there from there. We can only get there from some kind of here. I get invited to work in communities because they don't really like here. And they want to imagine a there. But we can't imagine the there unless we spend time investigating and working on here. The image theater work does that really well.
Yeah, and I think the tension you talk about in drama is very resonant in working as communities too. I think we see in our work a lot that a lot of it is working with people who you might not agree with, or, how do you validate all perspectives? And so I think that exercise really is a nice way of introducing that concept.
And the test of things, I think, isn't how we navigate stuff when it's going really well.
No.
The test of things is how we navigate stuff when we run into problems with each other.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, okay, what about a process that does lead to performance then? So we've talked a little bit about, some of the things you might use in a workshop, but at Theatre for Living, you use an audience interactive technique called forum theater to engage audiences in the outcome of the show. So for people who are new to forum theater, you can read a little bit about it on the slide there, but David, I'd love if you could share an example of a time where something an audience member might have offered in a forum theater performance that may have surprised you, or maybe made you think of the issue you were exploring in a different way.
Well, first let me say, I think that the best forum theater, this audience interactive theater that looks at problem solving, is best when it's asking questions we really don't have answers to. Mm-hmm. I've seen forum theater where the creators of the project already know the answer, or they already believe they know the answer.
Right.
And the event is very, very successfully or professionally trying to manipulate the audience to come to the conclusion that the people who've created the project want them to come to. Much like, when many of us have gone to events where we're being asked our opinion, like from governments and stuff. We want to do a consultation with the people. And halfway through the consultation, you realize you're being facilitated to come to a conclusion that's already been come to. that you're there to confirm something. It's just so disrespectful. And so for me, the best forum theater is forum theater that asks questions we actually don't have answers to. And if you do that, you have to be prepared to get solutions that you don't like. Because this is the nature of real dialogue. If we're going to go into real dialogue, we have to be prepared to get uncomfortable. Because that's actually where change is. It's in that place of discomfort. And so we did this big project, Shwa'amet, Home, on issues of reconciliation. And it was a very complex play, a beautiful piece, if I say so myself. People can watch it for free online. And in one of the scenes, and this scene was really important to the Indigenous cast members and my associate director, Renai Morisseau, this particular scene in which an Indigenous father and his daughter, she's wanting him to tell her all about his experiences in residential school. And these are real triggers for him. He doesn't want to go there. And she needs to understand this in order to understand who she is. This is a real tension inside the community. And he gets really mad at her and he yells at her. And in the forum one night, this woman yells, "Stop." This young Caucasian woman yells, "Stop," to replace the father, an older Indigenous man. Now, with some people who do forum theater work, this is really, really frowned upon. Not in my work. In my work, the casting is really important. But once we get into the forum, anybody can replace anybody. If you believe that you understand the issues that the character is struggling with, I think that is really important in the world we live in today. And you can feel the tension in the audience as she's coming onto the stage. What does this young white woman know about residential school issues? Well, honestly, not very much. So what right does she have? You know what she understands? She does this fantastic intervention because she understands trauma out of her own life. I don't need to know what that experience was, but it's clear. She doesn't overlap the indigenous, her and the Indigenous father don't overlap like this. It's not necessary. I would suggest it's almost always impossible. We are not each other. They overlap like this. And in that space of overlap, she has fantastic knowledge that is relevant to everybody in the room. She navigates this thing with the daughter in such a beautiful, healthy way. And so, is it surprising? Yeah, it's surprising. It's really challenging because it challenges a perception, I think, that is really alive today, that we are separate from each other and there's no way for us to understand each other's struggles. And while I agree, we aren't each other, there are things about being Megan that I can never understand. And there are things about Megan's experiences that out of my experiences, I have insights into. If we allow ourselves, if we give ourselves the permission to not look at, keep focused on how we're different. We're in a world today that is polarizing in terrible, terrifying ways. And I think that part of the power of the work is not how we build more walls, but how we build bridges.
That's a great example. So before we head into our question and answer period then, David, obviously we're so lucky to have you on our call today, and you have so much experience and so many years that you bring to this work. So I would love to know, what you would say is the secret ingredient to making a tool like theater come to life in the context of community change. Give us a little bit of your own secret genius.
No, I don't think it's secret. I say this all the time. It's not rocket science, folks. you know, with the image theater stuff, just let me say this. I get asked to do conferences and stuff a lot. And I say to the organizers, have you booked a keynote speaker yet? And if they go no, I say, great, don't. Don't come and pay somebody a lot of money to talk at the plenary for an hour. Hire me, I'm a lot cheaper, and give me 4 delegates. And the night before, we're going to create some images about the subject matter of the conference. And instead of a keynote speaker, let the delegates be the keynote. And I will get the audience coming into the images, just like I explained. And it will be really profound. We have 45 minutes, an hour. And the organizers always go, well, this sounds really interesting, but you don't know our community. They're not going to do this. And I say, that's my problem, not yours. Trust me. And, I've had experiences where there's like 300 people in the audience and the first invitation happens and 90 people are coming onto the stage, because as human beings, this is like what I explained early on about storytelling. We are starving to do this. And so the power, and the reason I told that story is that is such a simple thing. It's wonderful that the reaction is what it is. And frankly, it's a little depressing that people find it so powerful, because it's so basic. And it is proof all the time of how far away we've got from being human in a mechanizing world. And so the power of it, I think, is in its grassrootsness, in its authenticity. I don't think it's complicated.
Yeah, but I agree. I think that is the secret sauce. And I think you shouldn't sell yourself short, because, you can know all the facts in the world, but I think a lot of the things that we're facing are just being humans and being real with one another. And the world that we live in now has made that more and more of a challenge. So these types of things are really important, and I think really, really valuable. So yeah, I just want to thank you so much for sharing that. It's really, really insightful, and hopefully our audience thinks so. So let's find out how the audience is doing. So now is your opportunity to ask your own questions. So you can use your question or comment box on the side there, and my colleague Duncan will ask some questions of yours. So Duncan, do we have any questions so far?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And just a reminder, if you don't have a question, you can still open up the Q&A panel and give a thumbs up to a question that speaks to you, and we'll try our best to answer as many as possible. The first question comes from Tracy, and they write, David, I know that you've made a decision to cancel your TFL trainings this year because it feels important for that work to happen face-to-face. Can you say more about that? And have you seen good examples of folks that are doing community-engaged theater online?
Hi, Tracy. I know Tracy. Yeah, I've canceled the trainings because I don't, not everything can be everything. And the work is 3-dimensional work, organic 3-dimensional work. And I've been in some sessions now online, and they don't work for me. Taking this 3-dimensional organic work and trying to put it into a 2-dimensional mechanical platform. I think that in order for me to give a training, in any kind of valuable way, we have to be in the room together. We have to be able to touch each other. It is group work. And I'm not prepared to compromise that. And so, I think I'm offering discussion sessions instead this year where we're going to be able to talk about it. And I think that Zoom is a great platform for doing that. I applaud the people who are using platforms like Zoom to try to find a new way. I think, however, what's necessary, and everything has to start somewhere, is the language of theater that we use. I don't think it translates well into Zoom. What's necessary is a new language. Things work well on Zoom. A monologue works well on Zoom. Music can work well on Zoom, although I know musicians who've had a really hard time with it because there's a chemistry to being in the room together and making music. It's not just about the sound, it's about the vibrations in the room. And you don't have that through this. But I've seen productions on Zoom, where the actors are trying to pretend they can affect each other, that they can touch each other, or they can hand each other objects. And I'm sorry, folks, but it sucks. and I understand why people are trying to do it. But the theater is a physical language inside a room with people. And there will come a time when we can do that again. And so I've chosen to not take the trainings online. Just one more thing about this. I know it's going on for a long time. The ones that have been successful in some way have taken the physicality out of it. Stop trying to make theater that's physical on Zoom. It works as radio, like radio drama. I'm old enough to remember when there was radio drama. I used to do a lot of it. And I have found that if I'm watching a production on Zoom and I close my eyes and I don't have to think about the fact that the actors are trying to make it physical, or that they're not able to do just, I have to look at the camera, just this. That, because in that little frame, if they're moving around like this a lot, it's so distracting. It's radio, and it works as radio. I hope that answers your question, Tracy.
David, I think that's a good point, and I'll just add to that. I used to work for an organization called Theatre for a Change, and they're a British NGO that works across different countries. And a big offering of theirs was radio drama, and they would use forum theatre and have people call in, and it was really, really engaging. So it is a nice alternative that I hadn't thought about before. What about another question, Duncan?
Yeah, thank you both for that. Those are really insightful answers. The next question comes from Amit, and they ask, question to David, how do you define community? Can a community be a temporary project-oriented community?
Good question, Amit, who I also know. Hello. Yeah. A community, years and years ago, community used to be easier to define because it tended to be geographic in many ways. But we live in an incredibly mobile world now where the boundaries aren't as clear anymore. I'm a member of many, many communities. I'm a member of, I live in a housing co-op. I'm a member of an intentional housing community. I'm a member of the theater community in Canada, the professional theater community. I'm also, though, a member of the applied theater community. I'm a member of the Theater of the Oppressed community, but I put myself kind of on the edges of it when I adapted it to theater for a living. There are some people who really appreciate that, and there are some people who think I'm the devil. So a community, an organization is a community. You know, a university is a community. It's a living organism. It's a community. So a community is defined somehow by common interest, sometimes by common geography, sometimes by, you know, living in an office building together. They're a community. And so community has lots of different definitions. But I think one thing that holds true is that they're contained by something, whether it's common interest, whether it's walls, you know, prisoners in a prison might not think of them all as a community, but the prisoners and the prison guards are living inside a common structure, and they are a community. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed that approach to it. Our next question comes from Debbie, and they ask, how do you negotiate with communities to do theater or drama that wouldn't ever dream of doing it? Do you always get an invitation first?
Yeah. Hi, Debbie. Yes, there's an invitation first, but invitations, I think, can happen in various ways. Very often for me, email comes, the phone rings, mostly it's email now. And people go, we'd like to do this thing. Are you interested? Can you come and do this with us? And I have the privilege of being able to operate that way because I've been doing it for 38 years. And people know me. But everything has to start somewhere. And so when I first started, I was doing marketing. I would get on the phone and start calling people and explaining what the work was and saying, here's the work. Are you interested by this? What kind of issues are you dealing with? And would invite them to make an invitation to me. Because the invitation has to be real. So I would never just impose myself on a community. Try really hard not to do that. And, you know, there's a much larger conversation here about outreach and even invitations, because I try to figure out if somebody gets in touch. Who is that person? They might be the community wacko. You don't know. And so, you know, for me, it's important that where the invitation might come from one person, that there is a committee working to bring you in. So it's not just one person who, with maybe really good intentions, is going to try to impose that work on a community. It's happened very rarely, but over 38 years, some stories about terrible situations I found myself in, because as much as I've tried, when I've actually got someplace, it's been an imposition on the community. And I've canceled workshops that I've signed contracts to do, because part of the contract is it's not an imposition on the community.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Our next question comes from Shyla, and they ask, David, what are the youngest ages you've worked with, and how have you found that children respond to this work?
Yeah, you know, I've had 8-year-olds in workshops that had the wisdom of 60, 70-year-olds. And I've had 60 and 70-year-olds in workshops that weren't very wise. I don't think getting old necessarily gives you wisdom, unfortunately. And so I think it really depends on the individual. I have not worked with the whole group of 8-year-olds. I'm not sure. I'll share this with you. I know we have a lot of people online, but I didn't understand children very well, even when I was a child. So I was always hanging out with people that were older than me. And so I don't know this guy how this guy would work with a whole group of, say, 8-year-olds. But I have worked really well with groups of 14-year-olds. And I don't treat them any differently than I treat a group of adults. And I think that's really important, and they've really appreciated it. That, you know, I find that working with children sometimes, with kids, you can get condescending. And they smell it a mile away. And it's really a problem in the world we live in. I did a project years ago. You don't have to know where the community was. I've been brought in. There were almost 100 organizations attached to this project on family violence issues. And one of the organizations was the Hells Angels, wanting to work on family violence issues. And there was one organization getting in the way, and it was the local school board. And we had to have a meeting, and they said, they're too young. They're too young to deal with these issues. And I said, so they're not too young to be experiencing the issues, but they're too young to talk about the issues. Is that what you're saying? Like, what sort of morality is this? And the woman from the local health authority, she was so angry, I thought she was going to burst a blood vessel. And she called these people from the school board cowards to their faces, said, I will sign a document. You are not responsible for anything. And we went ahead with the project, and it was a very powerful project in the community. And I didn't treat them any different than I would treat adults. The power of this work, and you have to trust it, is that it meets the people in the room where they are, if you allow that to happen. So it's about the facilitator not being judgmental. I'm a human being. There are sometimes internally I'm going, oh, I wish this was going deeper than I feel like it's going. But I have to remember that for this group, it may be going much deeper than I'm imagining. Your work has to be non-judgmental that way. And that doesn't mean you don't challenge them and push them, you know, it's part of the game. But you have to trust that they're going to do this the way they're going to do it, regardless of age, etc. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you. Our next question comes from Pamela, and they write, I'm so thrilled to hear from you, David. After over 20 years since I attended a workshop of yours, I still vividly remember all that I learned. I'm very interested in your thoughts about how you see using arts or theater as methods for data collection in community, or as ways of creating evaluation processes as a catalyst for social change.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this, and I don't want to undermine you, but I can see the questions, and I'm going to very quickly answer Lauren's question because I think it's important. Can you talk about the place of fiction in applied theater? Because I think it's really important. I don't do documentary theater. I forbid a process where if Megan has offered something that we're going to do Megan's story, forbidden in my work. I think it's really difficult to work that way, and it turns the work into therapy. And I'm not a therapist. I don't do therapy. Although the work is highly therapeutic because of the reasons I've talked about previously. What we do is we create a fiction that tells the truth of the community story. Nobody is ever playing themselves, but they're playing characters they know very, very, very well. Because, you know, if we're going to put Megan's story up on the stage, I don't know Megan well enough. I'm going to just start making stuff up now. If it's Megan's story and there's the brother in the play, then the poor guy playing the brother, because Megan's going, well, that's not actually what my brother did. Yeah. He can't play the brother. It's impossible. Mm. And so we're going to create a fiction that everybody can own. Because what is the truth in the theater? Is it what actually happened? Or is it what the audience will recognize as true? Because just like all art, the audience has to be able to project their own life onto whatever's on the stage and then see their own life reflected there. It's an image, folks, and it's interpretable. The truth is what the audience will perceive, recognize as being true. Thanks for that, Lauren. Okay, Pamela, sorry, I have to just look. Data collection. You know, I've done some projects that are legislative theater projects where we're trying to use the audience interventions, where audiences come and try to solve the problems, as a way to create legislation. And when doing that, I've always had a scribe in the audience who's taking notes about the desires behind the interventions, behind the ideas. And I've also been saying to audiences, because we do analysis after every idea, so this idea that came onto the stage was successful here on the stage, but because of the structures that exist out there, how many people think that the structures would get in the way? And lots of hands go up. And I'd say, how? Why? How would they get in the way? Blah, 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 blah. And what would need to happen structurally for this idea to be successful? And people are in a sentence or two. I'm quite strict about this. Please don't talk in long paragraphs. And the person's taking notes. And that is a kind of data collection. Then the person takes away, condenses, digests, and has given to agencies that we're dealing with. So for instance, we used this in a mental health project that changed local policies around mental health issues in communities. So I hope that answers your question about data.
Yeah, thank you for that. Our next question comes from Sharon, and they write, "Hi, David. Lovely to virtually meet you. There will be after effects of this pandemic and long-term isolation that may be felt for generations. Forum can be used to rehearse for reality. I'm an actor and applied theater practitioner. Can you make any suggestions for exercises I could look at or practice to prepare for when workshops begin again?"
Yeah, you're expressing a concern I have that once we can meet in groups again, you know, no conspiracy theory here. The virus itself is retraining us to keep a distance from each other. And once we're able to get into rooms together, I think it's going to take time for people to be comfortable getting into rooms together. They're not going to happen at the same time. And so I think that, I don't know if I can give you specific games or exercises, but I think that there are things to invent. So, you know, just off the top of my head, okay, I know that my bubble has increased right now. It's physical. When I'm walking down the street and somebody comes, you know, closer to me than I'm used to be comfortable with, I can feel it. I explained this to somebody and they said, "Welcome to being a woman, David." And quite honestly, I understood something from that comment in a way I've never understood because I'm not a woman. It was a really interesting moment for me. My bubble has gotten tighter. And I think that there may be ways to actually acknowledge that in a room and say to people, let's practice increasing the bubble. Are people interested in doing that? And actually do that physically with people. This is me going, you can't get there from there. You can only get there from here. And I think that's a really, really, really good thing to keep in mind always when one is deciding to do things. What's our collective here? I'm sorry, I need to tell a quick story. I was in a workshop with Augusta Boal many, many years ago in Holland. And I saw something that the other participants were asking the wrong question. They were asking the what questions. If this happens, what do I do? As if there's a formula somehow. There isn't. And I realized they needed to be asking the why question, not the what question. Why are we here doing this? And if I'm clear about why we're here doing this and in the context that we're in, then the answers that come to me are about what to do next. Because there's no formula. There's only, you know, in a workshop, you're here and you take this step. And having taken this step, you're informed about the next step to take. And then you're informed about the next step to take. It really is an organic process. And so I would say that you come up with techniques to help make the bubble bigger would be really important.
Thanks for touching on that. I think that's really resonant because, you know, I think we talk about the value of this work pre-COVID to helping to break down barriers and how, you know, we've built up space around ourselves already in our society to think very individually. And so I would argue that this work is going to be more important than ever to start thinking about ways of sort of bringing people closer together in a slow and trusting environment. I think that's going to be really important work moving forward. I'd love to continue on here, but looking at the time, I think that will bring us to the end of the discussion for today. So thank you, first of all, David, so much for sharing your knowledge with us today, and also everyone who joined the call and asked questions. It's been really, really nice to hear people's perspectives. For those of you out there who are interested in learning more about David's work, I would really recommend you pick up a copy of his book, Theatre for Living, The Art and Science of Community-Based Dialogue. It's a must read if you're interested in pursuing this topic further. The book is available in German and Spanish and in print and online, so you have no excuse not to get it and not to read it. You can also visit the Theatre for Living website for lots more information, as well as a video archive of Theatre for Living's work throughout the years. All of this will be included in your follow-up email after the call, as well as a contact for David if you want to follow up with him personally.
And listen, I know, look, I can't promise to do all of this, but I can see the questions. And there's some interesting questions here. And if the people who are asking the questions want to email me their question, I can't give you long answers. It's way too much typing, but I'll try to answer what you're asking.
That's a very generous thing to do. Thank you. So let the questions roll in. We'll make sure to send you David's personal details. And I'll pass it over to you, Duncan, to wrap things up.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Just a few short announcements. Just if you've enjoyed this webinar, through June, the Tamarack Institute has committed to doing weekly community building webinars to help equip you for community change. You can join us for discussions on evaluation, systems change, collective impact, and much, much more. And if you can't join the live event, you can register anyways and receive a full recording of the discussion. As Megan mentioned, in a few days, you'll receive a follow-up email, which will include a link to the full recording of today's call, additional resources, as well as the learning opportunities I've just mentioned. And if you want to learn more, you can visit us at tamarackcommunity.ca. Thanks again, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful day.